Right, everybody. Well, I would like to welcome Toby Culshaw, who's joined me today to have a chat about how HR supports business transformation, of course, the people and organisation pieces of that. So, Toby, welcome. Maybe when you say a quick few words of introduction for those people who don't know you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. Toby Culshaw, I lead talent intelligence for worldwide Amazon stores, so big business unit within Amazon. I come from a background of search, research, exec search, sourcing, all of that sort of fun stuff. And then through that, I realized I more and more like to use data to influence the decisions, and that led me down the path of talent intelligence. And I've been in this field for about the last 10 years or so. I'm a bit obsessed by it. I run groups on it, podcasts on it, write a book on it. Like, I'm a bit obsessed with talent intelligence, but I really think it's the vehicle we need to really make an impact for HR more generally.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Toby. And those of you who haven't, to really check out some of Toby's stuff. It is amazing. So I guess so going back to the topic today, really, it's really about and I'll give you a little bit of background. So we at Lace found, I'd say about 12 months ago, we were getting requests from clients asking us to help them think about how they support business transformation. And that actually led us, we've been doing some projects, but it also led us to a piece of research that we're about to publish in this area, but really wanted to get your take. Where do you think this whole topic of business transformation and HR's role in it, what's your initial take on that?
Yeah, I think obviously we're biased being in HR, but I think HR need to be proactive. We need to be at the table, and we need to be fundamentally involved with this stuff. We're in a period of unbelievable amounts of change and transformation. We're seeing in every which way, whether it's the remote work and what's the ways of working. We saw more change within a 2-year period than we'd forecast out for the next 20 years. Whether it's looking at the growth of roles the last 2 years, biggest growth since post-industrial and post-World War II, then we're seeing a massive reclaiming of the market, and everything's shifting again in the last 12, 18 months, and we're seeing the economy shifting again. We're just in this massively volatile period, and yet still, if you ask CEOs what is the biggest risk for your future development, future growth, it's having access to the right skills, having access to the right people to be able to deliver what we need to deliver as an organization. We're not getting more people anytime soon. If you look at the world population graphs, we've had a real constriction of the number of people. So getting access to people, getting access to skills, getting access to talent isn't going to be a problem that's going away anytime soon. So HR, it couldn't be a better time to step up to the plate, whether it's looking at talent management, how we manage people through an organization, promo paths, career pathing, skills development, or whether it's looking at external, bringing people into the organization, nearshore, offshore, automate, whatever it may be. There isn't a better chance to start influencing from HR as we have at the moment.
But something we were talking about a bit earlier before we started this conversation was what maybe a little bit on your experience of what the business perspective is on the role that HR plays.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating one. As I say, most senior leaders say access to talent is the biggest restrictor for growth or biggest inhibiting factor for their success. I think one thing that HR probably struggles to do is tie our HR mechanisms and ways of working and our processes into the actual business goals and what we're trying to deliver. And sometimes we get caught up in the wrong mechanism. So we might be looking at, for example, SWP, so strategic workforce planning. We're looking 5-10 years out. But the business might be in a business mode where they're just looking at the next quarter. They're looking at survival. We might be sitting there thinking about performance management and talent management and how we're managing people through an organization. They're just trying to crunch through the financials and get things out the door. I don't think we're necessarily as evolved as we should be yet in terms of understanding the business cycles, the biggest business timings, and what they're trying to achieve. Because it's really hard. This stuff is really hard. And we're not a function that has generally brought people in from other fields. So we don't generally have financial controllers coming in to be an HRD or ex marketeers coming in. We're not really in that field that's drawing those other individuals in, which means I don't think we're necessarily in sync. We're not hand in glove. I think we're progressing, we're getting better, but we really need to be very articulate about what it is we do and the value it adds and how that impacts the bottom line for the good or for bad.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, speaking as an ex-finance person myself, don't hold it against me. It's very interesting sometimes to compare the journey that finance went on, shall we say, 30 years ago, and where HR is today. It feels like it's beginning to go down a similar journey in terms of perhaps taking more of that strategic shaping role in the same way that finance moved towards that about 30 years ago or so. One thing that I'd just like to touch on again, we chatted about before, was sort of the from the business perspective, how easy they find it to interact with HR. If they've got a big transformation program, how easy they find that.
Yeah, I think it can be quite hard. I was talking to a friend recently, and they're an HRD at an organization, and their business line literally turned around and said, I know you've got all this expertise in HR. You've got your SMEs in talent acquisition and talent intelligence and people analytics and compensation benefits, et cetera, and the list goes on. And that's amazing. I just don't have time with all these people. I can time with you as my HRD. You need to be essentially the conductor of the orchestra. You need to pull all this stuff together. And I think that relationship is really important, and we need to work really, really hard so that that funnel is really clean, and people know when to pull on some different SMEs. They know when to, how do I bubble this information up? How do I get the right questions being asked so that we can dive in at the right level at different areas? And it's really hard. It's the honest answer. I think we have these silos within HR, and they're fairly distinct career paths, and they're fairly unique career paths and skill sets. And that means that people want to have their voice heard. Everyone likes to feel like they're the most important. We're the special one. We're unique. Everyone likes to feel that. So everyone wants their seat at the table. And I think it's really hard to facilitate all of that. And I think also just more broadly in HR, we need to realize that sometimes the right business decision isn't the right people decision. And we'd love it to be. And, ultimately, I'm biased once again. I would think and I would say that the people decisions generally are going to be the right business decision. But at times they won't. At times they'll make business decisions that go, do you know what? This is what we need to do to survive. This is what we need to do to break into a new market or get certain government contracts, whatever it may be. And it might not be popular, and it might not be the right thing from a talent management perspective or a talent acquisition perspective or comp and ben perspective, but it's what needs to happen for the business to roll forward. And I think we need to be commercially savvy enough to realize actually all decisions are people decisions, but all business decisions don't necessarily roll across our people agenda in the same way.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I suppose just building on that, so there's sort of this thing about how does the business and HR, speak to each other, interface? How do they agree what the transformation priorities are, and to some degree? But then there's another piece then about how does HR then assemble its sort of capability in concert? So just, are there other barriers perhaps to HR playing the role that it could play or even should play to really helping the business to drive the value from the business change they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably a couple of different ones there. I think that we've probably got a capacity and capability piece where the capacity, generally HR functions are generally underfunded. As a general rule, we're still process administration in a huge amount of our roles. Obviously with some traditional models like the Orient model, you move to the kind of self-service model, etc. That's been done to limited success. The customer base still doesn't really fully embrace that. They're still going to their HR BPs and asking some really basic fundamental questions. They should be self-serving themselves. And being, the customer obsessed HR functions we always try and help them and help them solve their issues. So we end up getting drawn into much more transactional work than we probably should be doing and arguably should be doing. So that really draws on our capacity. And I think we'll see with, everyone loves to talk about Gen AI at the moment. With Gen AI, you will see an automation, really relying on RPA and robotic process automation to try and help some of that process side of things. We've got to be really careful we don't get a lot of the process stuff automated and then go, great, we can reduce our HR headcount to the same level now. We've got to be really clear to say, well, actually, we can get rid of this admin work so then we can be more proactive. We can add that value a little bit more. And I think with that ties into the capability piece as well. We need to make sure that if we do get that time, we do want to add that value, we've got to be really clear that we're going to the table, and everyone always talks about the seat at the table. We need to make sure we're going to the table with the capabilities to talk in the same language. There's the famous thing of you end up at the table, everyone whips out their Excel and HR's there with their PowerPoint. We've got to be really clear that we're talking in the same language as the business, and we're talking with the same capabilities of the business, and bringing in expertise at the right level to deliver at the right level for our business.
Yeah, I agree with you, and presumably what we might expect to see therefore is less routine, low skill work, because that's mainly automated, and a lot more. Unfortunately, that then raises the bar for the work that remains, which is this much more value add, strategic, directly business impacting work, which means potentially there's an additional sort of skill set and possibly mindset actually to be able to deliver value in that area.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, we sort of saw this sort of real uptick in market demand. We some of the software vendors we were talking to sort of similarly seem to be, see a lot of demand from companies who are wanting to invest and build up their capability in the people side of business transformation. What are some of the market trends you might have seen? Have you sort of heard stories from other organisations, or maybe where you work now, where you can begin to see that actually there's a response to this context now, and what does that look and feel like?
Yeah, so once again, I'm coming at this incredibly biased, to be clear, but I'm definitely seeing a big uptick on the skills and the capabilities around that external lens. So obviously, I work in talent intelligence. I see a huge uptick in the talent intelligence capabilities and desire across organisations. As the world is getting more erratic, as things are changing, as competitors are getting more aggressive, suddenly purely having that internal view and understanding your internal movements, your internal workforce sentiment, or whatever, employee engagement, whatever it may be, that's not quite enough. You need to understand what's going on externally. You need to understand the risks and potential implications of that. So we see a huge uptick in that external labour market feasibility and data insights. Whether that's in pure play TI teams, usually it is. It could also sit within people analytics. It can be in strategic workforce planning. You're seeing a lot of teams that were doing operational workforce planning, pushing into that strategic workforce planning and say, well, actually, what does this look like a little further out? Obviously, we're seeing that a lot at the moment with generative AI, and people are saying, well, actually, if we're looking 5 years out, what do the roles look like? What's the shape of these roles? What's the capabilities within these roles? What's the value add in these roles versus process administration in these roles? So I'd say I'm seeing a lot more along that side of things, where we're saying, actually, we need to look further afield. We need to look at core efficiencies. We need to look at what competition is doing and how that sits. I don't think it's necessarily there yet. I think there's still a lot of room left for particularly TI to really impact. I think you see that particularly in those growth modes. With the constriction mode, yes, we can help with efficiencies. You can see when competitors are starting to switch back on, etc. But it's in those growth modes where having people or not having people is going to directly impact your bottom line. It's not going to give you the growth you need. That's when you really see the investment kicking in there. But I think we're definitely seeing huge amounts of maturity coming through. You see a lot more teams getting involved with the strategy teams and the M&A teams and the VP and C-suites to say, actually, what are we trying to drive as an organization? What's going to stop us from getting there? As we mentioned earlier, it's usually access to talent. Well, what are our competition doing around this access to talent? Are they offering different benefits? Are they offering different working solutions? Are they offering a different business model? Like, how does this all work? And so, yeah, I'm definitely seeing an upscaling around those sorts of areas.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the point you make about sort of teaming with some of these other support functions, with strategy, with finance, with technology. And that's something, again, that came out in our research is actually making some of this HR capability much more explicitly project based, and even to some extent, some people even begin to lift and shift some of that capability, still retaining an HR reporting line, but embedding it absolutely in project teams, to deliver business outcomes. And I think certainly for some organisations, they said previously where we tried to have this sort of remote model where we had a project and there was someone over there in HR supporting it, they just haven't had the traction from that they needed to have. So they've very much saying, no, we've got a deployment model now. You are working on this engagement, on this priority to get this piece of work done. I don't know whether you've seen things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting you mentioned around the kind of pulling out from HR into business areas. So I do a talent intelligence benchmarking survey every year with the Talent Intel Collective, and we've seen from 2 years back or 3 years back, sorry, we're over 80% of the talent intelligence teams sat within talent acquisition. Now it's less than 50%. So
Wow.
the huge sway. Granted, a lot still sit within broader HR, so they sit within SWP or people analytics. But we're seeing a more teams being sat within either operations or strategy or M&A. So we are seeing a big shift of the business demanding this, and I think that also ties into a resourcing piece. You know, the businesses generally will have a centralized funding model for how the enablement functions and HR functions will staff up. If they're not getting what they need, they're going to look to build it in house. And they feel like they can move faster, they can be closer to the customer, and they can invest into teams heavier. So I do see this drawback to have things more decentralized. I think it's a bit cyclical because that works great until you're in a leaner period and you say, well, actually, we've got this duplicative work going on all over the place. Let's re-centralize and have a bit more control on the spend on this stuff. So I think we've got to be really clear about what we are pushing back out to the business. And making sure it's being done in the right way. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's business context and business dependent, but for sure it's changing the models.
Okay. Well, hey, Toby, it's just been a real pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. I honestly think this is not a topic that just for now. I think this might be the topic, at least for the next decade, until we have considerable changes in conditions. Let's say there's more maturity on what HR role actually should be playing in this space of sport business transformation. I think it's going to be, if it's not already, we certainly have examples of where it is, but it's going to be a much more explicit part of the CPO and the HR leadership team's role to say, how are you driving this sort of business improvement, this business change? I think it's going to be harder, shall we say, to focus on HR for HR, right? Yeah.
Completely agree. I think the BAU activity is just going to have to become rhythm of business, just to get that off the side of the desk. We've got to focus on that transformation, on that change, how we're driving things to the future, because if not, we're just process administration. We're not adding the value. So we've got to focus on that future stuff and the transformation.
Well, thank you so much, Toby. Really appreciate that. And I'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll just do a pause there, but then just to say, I want to ask you one more question. I didn't want to do it in the main flow of things because it might be a bit left field. So I just thought we could do it as a separate thing, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I just wanted to, I've got a great question here. The sort of site, the thing that's been on my mind, which is, who owns the definition of work? So here's one of my sort of problems, right? Is arguably TI is sort of, and it's sort of, it'd be really interesting to see the perspective from a TI perspective, is that how much your TI people are actually thinking about. But hold on, what is the work that we actually want people to do? Mm-hmm. And the sort of the demand side of it. And it sort of strikes me that I think the business usually assumes that HR know what work is because HR have these job evaluation methodology and things like that. My experience of that stuff is usually horrifically out of date, right? And actually HR people don't know much about work. They know a lot about people and talent, but they don't really know about, particularly if you talk about white collar work, right? Mm-hmm. So it'd just be nice to get do you agree that might be an interesting kind of code or extra bit to do?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll start again. So one additional question I had for you, Toby, was obviously one of the consequences of business transformation is we know for all those external pressures we were talking about and internal drivers as well, is that work is changing, and it really feels like whether it's AI or changes in supply chain or these massive external factors, that we can expect, and we know from the creation of roles over the last decade, is that work is changing. So one of the questions I have is who do you think in the business actually has the responsibility for defining work, and what's HR's role in that, or should be?
Yeah, it's a great question. It immediately makes me think of an interview I heard with Naomi Bloom, and it must have been 10 years ago now. At the time, it was looking at kind of robotic process automation, and she was suggesting that human resources will be renamed. I forget the exact name, but it was something around workforce workload management, and it was talking about, do we need a permanent person? Do we need a contingent person? Do we need to offshore, nearshore? Do we need to automate? And I think that's probably still the case. I still think it needs to sit within HR as a broad functional capability, but I don't think it's necessarily HR as a title, as a name. I think it's more around what are we trying to achieve and what is the best outcome for that. I don't think there's a function I can think of within the business that's better suited to do it than us. You know, we sit on treasure troves of CVs and job descriptions and job architectures and job taxonomies and workforce taxonomies and all this sort of stuff. If anyone's going to look to redefine it and own it, I think it probably should be us. It's just going to be quite an interesting journey to get there as we look around skills-based hiring and everything else. I think it probably should be us. It's just we need to get onto it a bit more.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Toby.